You're watching World Insight. Russian President Vladimir Putin makes his first state visit to China under his new presidential term, and he will attend the SCO summit in Qingdao this weekend. This is also the very first meeting between the heads of states of China and Russia this year. In the past decade, the bilateral relations between China and Russia have blossomed, especially the strategic partnership that has been running high since Chinese President Xi took office 5 years ago. What will be the focus of discussion during the meeting between President Xi and President Putin this time? How can tight-knit China-Russia together weather global uncertainties over rising protectionism and unilateralism?
A medal that honors Vladimir Putin's outstanding contributions in promoting the friendship between China and Russia.
也是当前高水平
President Putin, with his great global influence, is the founder and promoter of the profound friendship between China and Russia in today's era. President Putin is the Chinese people's most respected and most familiar head of state, and he is also my most intimate friend.
也是我最好的知心朋友。
In recent years, guided and promoted by President Xi Jinping and President Putin, China-Russia relations have reached a historic high.
Xi Jinping.
On July 4, 2017, in Moscow, Putin presented President Xi with Russia's highest honor. China and Russia have worked together on the global stage, such as in the BRICS and Shanghai Cooperation Organization. With China's expanding influence in Central Asia, Sino-Russian ties played a much more vital role than ever in the development of the ICO. Russia is more concentrated on international security issues, and China has focused its attention on economic governance and multilateral bodies such as the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank.
Our objective was quite small, but as we worked together on these small issues, we found similarities between us. We realized that together we could achieve something bigger.
Like many other countries, strategic ties wouldn't exist when there are differences in cognition. And for today's China and Russia, perhaps it indeed is a common ideology, strong consensus, and huge potential for win-win cooperation that bring them happily together.
For more on China-Russia ties, let's ask our panelists. With us in our Beijing studio, Yang Xiyu, who is a senior fellow at the China Institute of International Studies. Welcome, sir. And joining us in Moscow, Russia, we have Alexander Lukin, professor and director of East Asian and SCO Studies at the Moscow State Institute of International Relations. Welcome to both of you, gentlemen. Certainly, the 8th is a big day for China-Russia relations, particularly if you look at the recent record. Mr. Lukin, Professor, may I ask you, so what does this frequent visit, interaction by the two state leaders mean and could mean for the nature of this bilateral relations?
Well, the nature of our relations with China is, of course, strategic partnership. But it's not just an ordinary strategic partnership, because I know that China has strategic partnership with many countries. The thing is that Russian-Chinese relations are based on mutual and almost identical views of the international situation, of where the world goes. So the main reason for the rapprochement between the two countries is that I would say the common vision and geopolitical interests. And the main interest is that both Russia and China stand for multipolar world. They're against one power center dominating the international system. And this is the main reason that they cooperate on many international issues.
Right.
Economic cooperation is also important, but it's not the main thing.
I remember during an interview, Mr. Yang, that President Putin had with CCTV earlier. He talked about, he liked talking about issues related to economic development and global affairs with Chinese President Xi Jinping.
Oh yeah.
He thought he always could have great conversations.
Well, I think the close ties between the two countries, one of the pillars for the base of the bilateral relation is the very close ties in the individual two leaders, top leaders. Not only because of the personal friendship, that's not important, but important thing is the two leaders really share many views on many important issues in the world, including the economic affairs. You know, both Xi Jinping, in my observation, both Xi Jinping and Putin put top priority at their respective domestic economic development, especially for the green and sustainable development. So, based on the shared view, shared vision, shared goal, there are a lot of subjects between the two to talk about, to discuss, to explore. So that is really a solid pillar for the bilateral relation.
And of course, the two are very much active in talking about some of the common ground.
Oh, yeah.
For example, economic development. Mr. Yang, during the interview with CCTV, President Putin talking about the bilateral trade over the past 4 months of this year, already exceeding the overall situation of last year, the whole year. So it seems that there is a momentum of picking up. Russia, after Western sanctions, has an urgency of developing its economy and has this momentum to do so.
Yep.
And China as well want to develop further into this partnership with Russia and in the region. But Mr. Yang, what eventually will drive this relationship?
Well, I think just as our Russian friend mentioned, now economic part is not the important one in the general bilateral relation. But just because for that, I believe the economic cooperation between the two commands the greatest potentials in the whole bilateral relation. Just look at the two vast countries. Number one, both of the countries remain at the developing level, and number two, both of the countries commands quite a diversified advantages between the two. So lot of potentials to be explored. That is the that contains a bright future for both of the countries.
Well, we could talk about the bright future, but how is the bright future going to be implemented? And also, rather, what are the details of this bright future? Professor Lu King, you have some areas to be identified?
Well, China is the most important partner for Russia. It's the first Russian trading partner since the year 2010, and it's a big market for Russian oil, for example, and some other raw materials. But now more and more Russia is selling to China some agricultural products and also some food products. So China is also one of the major investors into Russian economy, including the raw material sector. For China, Russia is, I would say, relatively less important, because Russia is only in the second 10 of China's main economic partners. And also Russia and China are both interested in the development of China's northeastern provinces and Russian Far Eastern and Siberian regions. And here we have quite a booming border trade, cross-border cooperation, investment in Russian Far East. So we have a lot of areas of for economic cooperation.
Not only Far East, but also so-called the Far West. If you look at the western part of China, and also how China come up with the Belt and Road Initiative with other players in the region, you also look at the EU, Eurasian Economic Union. Both leaders have been talking about the cooperation between these two initiatives. And Mr. Yang, help me to understand, have we seen a healthy track record of cooperation and correlation between these two initiatives?
Well, I think at this moment, both of the great initiatives remain at the initial stage. That means greater potentials ahead. Now both sides, I mean Russian government and the Chinese government, has determined to make a further efforts to make a closer cooperation between the two initiatives, so that the two sides can get a win-win results and get a 1+1 produce more than 2 effect. So I think not only the traditional areas like agricultural raw materials and military products, but also the two initiatives, cooperation and collaboration, will open broader range of cooperation between Russia and China as well as this region.
But having said that, though, we see Russian President Vladimir Putin, when he's talking about these two initiatives, he said that the Chinese President Xi Jinping has this global vision, and also he talked about the two initiatives fit with one another. Professor, looking how fit really are the two initiatives with one another? Will they really blossom individually and together? Do you see any signs of it?
A few years ago, China and Eurasian Economic Union signed a declaration on cooperation, and this year they already completed and signed the cooperation agreement. So it's basically in the interests of China to have only one customs border instead of several customs borders for the member states. So it opens the market more and more of those 5 countries to Chinese investments and trade. From a Russian point of view, and also other members of the customs union, because they all need Chinese investments and need growing trade with China.
Right.
Of course, they're also interested in that.
In the SCO, Shanghai Cooperation Organization, are they going to be competing and cooperating within that platform, or there's likely to be some quite close synergy between the two?
At the beginning stage, I remember some of observers worried about the strategic competition between the two big powers within the organization. But through the years and the years of practices, both of the countries provide evidence that Russia and China has got closer and closer cooperation for this organization. No strategic competition for dominance, but collaboration and cooperation for strengthening and widening the cooperation across all of the members.
Well, you know, gentlemen, recently we have heard that the Russian president talking about 3 important players of the SCO. Mr. Yang, I want you to comment about that as well. China, Russia, and India. Of course, there are probably different views coming from China as to who are the important players of the SCO, and probably from the other members of the SCO. What do you think, Mr. Yang, about the future potential when you see SCO develops into different areas? And how will different sides look at the future of SCO with different lenses?
Well, I think SCO will be in evolution towards more and more unique multilateral organization in the current international order. Just look at all of the international and regional organizations. Almost all organizations specified in certain areas, for example, security or economic. But SCO become a more and more comprehensive cooperation organization, and number one. And then number two, SCO develop a very unique but a great model for cooperation. Say, in the organization, just I mentioned earlier, no competition for dominance. So in this organization, we create a new model, say all members cooperate and act based on equal footing.
Okay, Professor Looking, is it possible?
Well, the main interesting thing that's happened this summit of Shanghai Cooperation Organization is, of course, that new members for the first time took part in this summit as full members, and these are India and Pakistan. Russia and China are, of course, the largest members of the, or used to be the largest members of organizations before that, and some people even called this organization somehow dominated by Russia and China, which was not exactly true. But at the moment, India, of course, is going to play also a very important role, and all these three countries basically share the geopolitical view. Some of them have some problems between them, but for an international organization, this is not very important. The important thing that though they both share the world view that the world should be multipolar, that all players should be equal, what they call that the international system should be democratized, meaning that there should be no domination by one power, and I think they will cooperate on that. I also hope that India could give a push for economic cooperation, because frankly speaking, economic cooperation within SCO as an organization is very low. There is, of course, cooperation between individual states, but not on the multilateral basis. There are basically no multilateral projects.
Mr. Yang, when you look at an organization, if it is security, or if it is about economic and trade ties, these are two very different focuses. So it really, in a way, is now the time for SCO to streamline what exactly it wants to do and what exactly is going to be the priority.
SCO was mainly focused on the cooperation for security, the shared security. By the way, I think SCO has been making or creating a new model for the security concept. Now, the very popular security concept in the world is the so-called collective security. I think SCO, the model of shared security created by SCO, the key difference from the collective is the inclusive security or exclusive security.
Okay.
And SCO give the inclusive security that make every member and the non-member are comfortable.
Okay.
Because we exclude no countries. We target at no countries. That is the right way for the new era's security for all countries.
Well, Mr. Yang, having explained that concept, I want you to go back to the economic and trade ties. What about the focus of SCO for the future?
Number one, I think the role of the SCO is expanding on the way. Not moving from security to economy, actually expanding from security cooperation to economic cooperation. So number two, gradually this organization will become a cooperation organization for wider range of areas, both economic and security.
That certainly is the vision. Will that be done? Professor Lukin, briefly.
Well, there are not many areas actually. So, for example, if we talk about security, there's basically military cooperation, which is going on very well, and also cooperation on anti-terrorist activities. There is an anti-terrorist structure based in Tashkent, which works pretty well.
Yeah.
So there are two main areas. Of course, there are also some general discussions, but in economics, as I said, there are virtually no progress. So it's not. You can call it broad in general, but if you talk about specific areas of cooperation, there are not too many.
All right. Certainly we have some very different views, and certainly we see a lot of work needs to be done for this year's SCO Summit for discussion of the future. Thank you so much, Yang Xiyu and Alexander Lukin from China and Russia, for being with us. Thank you.